It's late, and you've found me again. My name is Blair Morgan, and tonight I have a story that blurs the line between the screens we watch and the world we live in. What if I told you mind control wasn't science fiction anymore? Right now, at the University of California, scientists are creating cyborg beetles, steering them through the air like tiny, living remote-controlled helicopters. The military has taken it further, implanting cameras and heat sensors into the brains of rats, turning them into living surveillance machines. The technology is terrifyingly simple. They can literally switch neurons on and off with a pulse of light. The most chilling part: the scientists themselves admit this same method opens the door for controlling the human mind. It's a terrifying thought, isn't it? The idea that we're stepping into a future we once only read about in dystopian novels. But what if I told you that this kind of covert, terrifying experimentation isn't new at all? In fact, it has a long, dark history, hidden away from the public eye, often sanctioned by the very powers meant to protect us. For decades, one of the world's greatest superpowers ran a secret program with a single sinister purpose: to create the perfect, untraceable murder weapon. It was a laboratory dedicated to the science of assassination. Insiders knew it only as the Chamber. For decades, one of the world's greatest superpowers ran a secret program with a single sinister purpose: to create the perfect, untraceable murder weapon. It was a laboratory dedicated to the science of assassination. Insiders knew it only as the Chamber. The Chamber wasn't a metaphor. It was a real place, with real walls, hidden deep within the Soviet Union security apparatus, established as early as 1921, and run by the secret police, first the Cheka, then the infamous NKVD. Its mission was chillingly simple: find a poison that was tasteless, odorless, and utterly undetectable in an autopsy. A ghost that could kill. To do this, they needed test subjects, and in the era of Stalin's Great Purge, there was no shortage of them. Political prisoners, enemies of the state, men and women of all ages and states of health, were brought to the chamber from the gulags. They were told they were receiving medical care. The poison was administered in their food, in their drinks. The scientists, these doctors of death, would then simply watch and take notes. After years of horrific trial and error, they perfected their masterpiece. A chemical compound called C2. Its effects were unlike any other poison. The victim didn't convulse or scream. Instead, an observer would notice them become quiet, calm. They would appear physically weaker, almost as if they were shrinking. And then, within 15 minutes, they would silently die. Post-mortem examinations revealed nothing more than heart failure. The perfect murder weapon had been created, built on a foundation of countless forgotten lives. It's a specific kind of horror, isn't it? The cold, bureaucratic evil of a state deciding your life is nothing more than a variable in an equation. But what if the most terrifying laboratory isn't a secret government facility hidden in Moscow? What if it's a university basement in California, and the test subjects aren't condemned prisoners, but paid volunteers? This brings us to August 1971. Stanford University. Professor Philip Zimbardo wanted to study how power dynamics shape behavior, how good people can be made to do bad things. He screened 24 psychologically stable, healthy male college students. He flipped a coin. Half became prisoners, the other half, guards. The experiment began with a jolt of reality. The prisoners were unexpectedly arrested at their homes by actual Palo Alto police officers, charged with armed robbery, fingerprinted, and thrown in a squad car. They were brought to the Stanford County Jail, the basement of the psychology building, stripped, deloused, and given a smock to wear with no underwear, and a number for a name. The guards were given khaki uniforms, reflective sunglasses to hide their eyes, and a wooden baton. Zimbardo told them they had all the power. It was supposed to last 2 weeks. It didn't even last one. The descent was terrifyingly fast. Within 24 hours, the guards, these ordinary college boys, began to exhibit genuine sadistic behavior. They woke the prisoners in the middle of the night for pointless roll calls. They used push-ups as a common form of punishment for the slightest infraction. They took away mattresses, forced prisoners into solitary confinement in a dark closet, and made them clean toilets with their bare hands. It wasn't about order. It was about humiliation, and the prisoners, they broke. One young man, prisoner number 8612, suffered an acute emotional breakdown just 36 hours in. Don't just take my word for it. This is the actual audio from the experiment. It's the sound of a mind unraveling. Editor. Insert audio of prisoner number 8612. I'm burning up inside. I'm burning up, and I'm laughing. I'm laughing. What am I laughing about? I don't know, but I'm burning up inside. I can't. I just can't take it anymore. I just can't. Zimbardo himself, acting as prison superintendent, was getting lost in the simulation. The experiment was spiraling, and it might have gone on, if not for the arrival of one person who wasn't part of the game. Christina Maslach, another researcher, and Zimbardo's girlfriend at the time. She came to the basement on the evening of the 5th day and was horrified by what she saw. She saw the guards marching the prisoners, bags over their heads, to the bathroom. She heard the degradation in their voices. She told Zimbardo, "What you are doing to these boys is a terrible thing." It was her horrified, outside perspective that finally shattered the illusion. The next day, after only 6 days, the Stanford Prison Experiment was shut down. The conclusion was inescapable. The line between good and evil is not fixed. It is permeable, and sometimes, all it takes to cross it, is a uniform, and permission.it makes you ask yourself a very uncomfortable question, and I want you to be honest with yourself, here in the dark. If you were there, who would you have been? A guard, or a prisoner? Let me know in the comments. It's a scary thing to answer honestly. It's a heavy question to hold, isn't it, that thought of what darkness might be sleeping inside any one of us. The Stanford experiment showed us that monster can be coaxed out of ordinary people in a matter of days. The Soviet chamber showed us the cold, calculated evil a state can commit in secret. But this all forces a much larger, much darker question. What happens when that private monster, the one from the basement, is given a national uniform and an order? What happens when a government's secret cruelty is no longer secret, but becomes its official open policy? When cruelty itself becomes an industry? This is precisely what happened in the heart of Europe during the Second World War, at a system where science was no longer a tool for discovery, but an instrument of pure torture, wielded on an industrial scale. This was the reality of the Nazi concentration camps, and at the heart of its most infamous, Auschwitz, was a man they called the Angel of Death. His name was Josef Mengele. He was a doctor with a PhD in anthropology, and he walked through the camp with an air of detached curiosity, as if the human beings suffering around him were nothing more than specimens in his private, twisted laboratory. His presence meant selection. A flick of his gloved hand decided who went to the gas chamber, and who was chosen for his experiments. He had a particular obsession: twins. He gathered over 1,000 pairs of them, hoping to unlock the secrets of heredity. He was especially fascinated by twins with heterochromia, different colored eyes. He dreamt of finding a way to change the eye color of the Aryan race to a uniform blue. And he was willing to do anything to find out how. He would inject diseases, typhus, and chemicals directly into one twin's body and then morbidly watch to see if the other developed symptoms. When a twin died, Mengele would harvest their organs for comparative analysis. These weren't medical procedures, they were acts of butchery. He performed crude surgeries and amputations, often with no anesthesia at all, and it wasn't just him. At other camps like Dachau, doctors forced prisoners into pressure chambers to see how high an altitude a pilot could survive. They starved prisoners, giving them nothing but salt water, trying to find out if a downed pilot could survive on the ocean. Witnesses described the victims, driven mad by thirst, licking the floors after they had been mopped, just for a single drop of fresh water. Of the 1,000 pairs of twins Mengele experimented on, only about 200 survived. The ordeal. You might listen to this and find some strange comfort in the fact that it's history. That this kind of state-sanctioned scientific barbarism died with the fall of the Third Reich in 1945. You might think we, as a species, learned our lesson from the ashes of Auschwitz. You would be wrong. According to defectors and human rights groups, it's still happening right now. In the secretive prison camps of North Korea. The stories that have trickled out are echoes of the very same Nazi horrors. One female prisoner, a former inmate of Camp 22, gave a chillingly precise testimony. She said that one day, 50 healthy female prisoners were selected. They were forced to eat poisoned cabbage leaves. The women didn't know. They were hungry. The testimony describes how within 20 minutes, all 50 were dead, vomiting blood and screaming in agony. Their deaths were timed and studied. A simple experiment to test a new biological weapon, but the most devastating account comes from a man named Kwan Hyuk. He wasn't a victim, which perhaps makes his story even more haunting. He was a former security commander at that same camp, Camp 22. He fled, and he spoke about what he witnessed. He described a family. A mother, a father, a son, and a daughter, who were brought to a glass gas chamber for an experiment. He stood on the other side of the glass. He watched as the gas began to pour in. He says the parents knew what was happening. They knew they were going to die. But they weren't screaming, they weren't banging on the glass begging for their lives. Both parents knelt down on the floor of that chamber. They looked at their children, and they pressed their mouths to their children's mouths, trying to give them air, trying to breathe life back into their son and daughter, even as the poison filled their own lungs. A final, futile act of love in a world devoid of humanity. They died, Kwan said, trying to save their children from the very air they were all forced to breathe. After a story like that, where do you even go? How do you process a horror that absolute? Maybe you don't. Maybe you can only turn to the strange. The things that blur the line not just between good and evil, but between life and death itself. There's a grainy black and white film from the 1940 St. A Russian scientist, Sergei Brukhanenko, showcases his invention, the autojector. It's an artificial blood circulation system, and attached to it, resting on a sterile white tray, is a severed dog's head. As the machine quietly hums, the head reacts. A sound makes its ears twitch. A brush against its whiskers causes its eyes to blink. Its dry tongue licks across its own nose. It's alive, but it's not. Decades later, in 2005, American scientists took this a step further. They took healthy dogs, drained every last drop of blood from their bodies, and replaced it with a cold, oxygenated saline solution for up to 3 hours. The dogs were in a state of suspended animation. No heartbeat. No brain activity. Clinically dead. Then, they performed the resurrection. A full blood transfusion and a single electric shock. The dogs' bodies shuddered, their hearts restarted, and they woke up. A little confused, but otherwise unharmed. The horrifying purpose behind this grotesque display, to one day use the technique on humans to buy precious time for surgeons to fix catastrophic injuries, like those from a gunshot wound or car crash. The line between a miracle and a nightmare is sometimes just a matter of perspective. But for some of the stories we've heard tonight, there is no gray area. There is no other perspective. From sci-fi mind control that's already here, to the real-world gas chambers of the past and present, a terrifying pattern emerges. Unchecked power, whether in a single scientist or an entire state, always finds a way to be cruel. These aren't just stories. They're warnings. If you believe these warnings need to be heard, take a second to hit the like button. And subscribe for more deep dives into the shadows of our world. Content like this is often targeted, so please, subscribe and turn on all notifications. Because a video like this might not be here tomorrow.